It's just about doing business with reasonable people. And like you said, if somebody wants out and somebody wants in, what's the best way to make it work? When you're a franchisee, you're obviously playing their game, right? My name is Matt Tanner, and this is Franchisees United. Welcome to episode 3 of the Franchisees United podcast. I'm your host, Matt Tanner. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming on Andrew Bleiman. Andrew represents franchisees and franchisors across the country and is considered one of the nation's leading franchise attorneys, according to the Franchise Times. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
So
happy to be here.
We're glad that you're here. I actually, just recently, I didn't even know that you guys had an office in Boca.
We do. We have a satellite office. Our partner comes down here much of the year, and it's just up the road. But happy to be down in Florida. Beats the Chicago weather. And
yeah, what's the temperature like in Chicago right now?
Actually, they just had a record 62 on Christmas Day. So people were jet skiing.
That's actually insane. I was expecting it to be like 15 degrees.
It's going to get very cold. I'm sure through April. So
this is one of my first Decembers in Florida, and it's like 75. What's it today? Like 75 degrees or something. It's incredible. But,
that's why 1,000 people a day are moving to Florida.
That's true, and it's good to be in the real estate business. We're trying to run ads up where you live, and we're running ads in New York and Pennsylvania, all up north. We're actually literally running ads trying to get people to move down to South Florida just because of weather and income taxes. So those are our two. A lot
of
points.
people are listening.
So, but I kind of wanted, we're very excited to have you on the show today, mainly because, obviously my background is growing up in franchises, and I've seen a lot of franchisees over the years that work with just any regular attorney, whether it's reviewing their leases or their franchise agreements and documents. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the difference between what you and Justin and Marks and Klein do as franchise attorneys versus just any other attorney. So I guess, can you talk to us a little bit about what you do day to day and what differentiates you from any other attorney, essentially?
Sure. So Marks and Klein and our practice is concentrated on franchising, representing franchisees and smaller emerging franchisors, I would say. We're business lawyers with a concentration in franchising. A franchise is obviously a business. There's nuanced laws and rules related to franchising that we have a firm grasp of. And, we've seen hundreds of franchise agreements, franchise disclosure documents. So we're well versed in what's in the document, and then also, very importantly, sometimes what's not in the document or what's not said in these documents and what that means. So we try to help franchisees get an understanding and be able to walk into these opportunities with eyes wide open, because buying a franchise is not like any other business. And I've been doing franchise work since approximately 2003. I started practicing in 1998, and both on the franchisor and the franchisee side. And we know a lot of the brands and systems and have seen the trends and whatnot in franchising. So what we try to do is get franchisees, prospective franchisees, educated on here's what your rights, obligations, responsibilities are. Here's what the franchisor's rights, obligations, liabilities are, and try to allow people to firmly grasp this, because it's not like owning another business.
It's just so much different, right? And there's so much involved with franchise law and what can and cannot be disclosed and all of that stuff. So, I've done a lot of franchise agreements over the last few years, and, I'm very familiar. But to people that are just getting involved into their first franchise, or maybe even entering a new brand, what are some of the things that you think that they should look for, whether it's in the franchise disclosure document or the franchise agreement? What are some of the things they should look out for or look for, essentially?
It's a great question. And, what we try to counsel and advise clients on, and it's not necessarily legal advice, but it's more, I think, business and practical advice, is, looking at the opportunity, looking at the brand, understanding what the investment is, understanding what the return on investment might be, and trying to get as much information and do as much due diligence on that as possible. You may have, quite frankly, a lackluster brand, or a brand that's not too appealing, yet it may be highly profitable and lucrative given what the investment is and given what the opportunity is moving forward. Whereas you may have a much more high-profile brand, and the margins may be very, very thin.
And the markets might be saturated, right?
Markets might be saturated. The cost to get in may be very significant. So it's really important to understand, what's that ROI, return on investment, going to look like? How much can I put into this, and what might I earn? Now, not every franchisor discloses that information in item 19. If they're going to talk about income, gross revenue, profitability, things of that nature, would be in item 19 of the franchise disclosure document. But franchisors are not required to incorporate that. So you can find that information out from other franchisees if they'll provide it. Mm-hmm. But not every franchisee will obviously tell you what their information is. But really having a good understanding of what you might earn, and what the opportunity is. Like I said, if in market saturation, to your point, mm-hmm. if you're going to be able to put one unit in an area, that may not be as attractive as getting another, or having an opportunity, pursuing another opportunity with another brand where you could put 5, 10, 15 locations up. Because as a franchisee, it really, as I tell most clients, franchising is different things to different people. You can buy a job, which is perfectly acceptable and fine for many people, and that's what they're looking for. You can buy a business and have 5, 10, 15, 20 locations. Or now, literally there's publicly traded franchisees mm-hmm. that have hundreds or thousands of units, and you have a very, very large corporation at that point, or large company. So, when you look at these opportunities, it can be a different thing for a different person, and understanding what your goals and desires are is important. Some of these brands, some opportunities, the average unit volumes may only be $300,000, $400,000, or $500,000 a year. Could be less. A lot of the hair cutting salons, you may be in the $200,000 to $300,000 range.
Right.
So understanding what you want and what you're pursuing is important. And then obviously, if you have profitable units, and you have multiple, 10 or 20 of them, you can obviously make a lot of money.
For sure. So, it's funny you say, because, there's so many different types of franchisees I've seen over the years, and I'm sure you've come across so many different mindsets, if you will, because there's the owner-operator mindset where, like you said, a franchisee is basically buying themselves a job, essentially, which, is obviously probably preferred to them versus just working as a salaried position elsewhere. And then there's also the mindset of really, getting into a brand and building a portfolio, like you said. So I think, there's a lot of differences between those two mindsets. And, from what I've seen across the years from so many different franchise owners, is franchisees that want to either be complacent and just stick with one location, or the complete opposite, and they're growing too quickly. And I've also seen franchisees that are willing to get into new brands, or even brands that are doing well, but then they go into a new market and take the risk, and then they don't do well because there's no brand awareness. So have you seen that over the years? And what are your thoughts on what franchisors should be doing to make sure a franchisee is successful in a new market?
Well, franchisors generally don't commit to doing a lot in the franchise agreement.
Okay.
Their obligations are not to make you successful. Really, it's on the franchisee to ensure and to make their own success.
So what are they required to provide?
Franchisors, generally, they will loan you the manual. They will assist with site selection. They will train you. They will visit and inspect you if they would like to. Mm-hmm. And they are available to provide support and assistance. Right. But there's really no mandatory obligation to do any of that. What you'll see, though, is a lot of franchisors who are interested, invested in the success of the franchisees will do a lot more than that, even though they're not contractually required to do so, with regard to marketing and with regard to operations and training, and they'll go above and beyond what the agreement says. But if you really look at the agreements, there aren't a lot of affirmative obligations on the part of franchisors. And that's really standard in franchising. It's not anything that, if you're looking at a franchise agreement or a franchise disclosure document and you see this type of language, it's pretty uniform that's the language you'll see, whether, you're in a sub sandwich shop or a service business or an automotive repair, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Understanding that when you're on your way in and then talking to other franchisees and then getting comfortable with the franchisor who you are investing with to see, what are they doing for franchisees? Are they committing marketing dollars to new markets to really help drive brand awareness? Or are you responsible for local marketing on your own? What does the infrastructure of the franchisor look like? How many people do they have? Some franchisors, our home offices are very lean. Yeah. There aren't a lot of people even working for the franchisor. They have a lot of outside consultants or other resources available. Are you seeing
more and more of that as a trend today, or is it the opposite?
I'd say more and more today. There's a lot of new emerging brands that are very lean, that use various consultants and advisors and don't have a very significant home office except for a few individuals, and really understanding what they're going to do, what they've done for other franchisees to help build the markets. But what I always tell clients is, don't sit back and rely, and not to be cynical, but you don't sit back and rely on the franchisor. I mean, you have to be prepared to do this. You have to be prepared to do the marketing, put in the hours, spread the word, get involved with the community, drive brand awareness yourself.
Absolutely.
And, if you're not prepared to do that, probably no one will be doing that, because when you're talking about the development of new markets, and particularly where you have a franchisee who's committing to build 3, 5, 7, 10 locations, whatever it is, the franchisor is really looking to that group, that person, to do that market development for the franchisor.
Right, for sure. And I've seen, a lot of franchisees that open in different areas, and then they rely on the franchisor so much. And, franchisors are very clear that it's up to you as a franchisee to make your operation successful. Like, they can only do so much. They can give you the blueprint and the recipe, but it's up to the franchisee to generate success for their business. And I've seen, over the years, a lot of franchisees that will go back to the franchisor, and when they're not doing well in particular, and either renegotiate royalties or marketing. Is that something you're seeing across the industry at times? And are you seeing it more with brands that are more established, or are you seeing it with brands that are up and coming?
Truthfully, the franchisors really won't negotiate or renegotiate the royalty. But perhaps
they might provide relief at times, right?
Potentially. Yeah. I wouldn't hold my breath for that. I think I'd look for other ways for the franchisor to provide support, like you mentioned, marketing,
for sure,
marketing dollars, other resources, advertising, collateral, assistance with operations or,
Right.
people coming into the store to help in that regard. Things that aren't going to cost the franchisor money
Yeah.
are more likely to be provided than, asking them not to take their royalty
Right.
every week. Now, obviously, if you have a store that can't financially support
Right.
the royalties and the marketing and everything else, brands will work with franchisees to try and do something to help them and to avoid the store from closing. But it's not something that they have to do, obviously, and it's probably a last resort. But you're never going to get anything you don't ask for.
That's one thing I've learned in life.
Yeah, and so depending on the situation, keeping stores open and operational is important to franchisors.
Yeah.
And depending upon the franchisor, a new emerging brand that's trying to make it is probably more likely to make some concessions and do something because, the success of the early units is going to be critical for them to get to the 100, 200, 500 unit mark. If the
Right.
first several can't get out of the gate, it's going to be very hard for them to grow.
Right.
Because there isn't going to be anyone there to do the validation. But if you have a more long-standing established brand, they probably have a line of people waiting to either take over the unit or buy a new unit and develop it. So you probably have a little less leverage in that situation.
For sure. And that makes sense. And, I always believe, obviously franchisors and franchisees, it's just a partnership at the end of the day. And obviously the franchisor wants the franchisee to be successful because that's how they're successful. So, but I definitely agree with you. And I've seen franchisees that'll go back to the franchisor and ask for royalty relief at times, out of desperation. That's why I wanted to ask you if you've seen it commonly.
We've definitely seen it. I wouldn't say it's common.
Okay.
And most of the time it's not, a waiver. It's more of like an abatement. Like we're going to accrue the balance, but you just don't have to pay it yet. Or some type of a payment plan or
just
reduced
to help with cash flow.
Exactly.
Gotcha. So I guess let's kind of pivot a little bit here. I want to talk about what you and Justin at Marks & Klein, what you guys do for, how you take on a franchisee client versus a franchisor. We've talked a lot about, how you guys help franchisees.
Mm-hmm.
Why would a franchisor come to you guys, especially in the early stages? What type of support do you guys provide for them?
We try to support franchisors in the same way, that we support franchisees, attention to detail, constant communication and guidance, but really to try and help franchisors create their franchise program, prepare the franchise disclosure document and ancillary agreements, and get them off the ground, provide franchise sales training. A franchise is a very nuanced sales process. There's lots of rules. There's things you can't say.
So what are some of the things that you can't say as a franchisor?
You can't talk about numbers
Okay.
that are different than what's in the franchise disclosure document. So item 6 is fees. Item 7 is initial investment. Item 19 is the financial performance representations. You can't talk about numbers that differ at all from what you've disclosed publicly. So if you don't make an item 19 financial performance representation, you can't talk about revenues, expenses, costs, anything like that associated with the business unless it's in that FDD. Now, for purposes of helping a franchisor, we'll help them prepare the franchise disclosure document that is used to sell franchises. So every franchisee has to be provided with a franchise disclosure document. There's a waiting period before the franchisee can sign the franchise agreement.
How long is that waiting period?
14 days,
Okay.
essentially. I mean, there's nuanced rules, but
Like
there's a waiting period. So the overall, we try to help counsel and advise them on the creation of the program, the implementation of the sales plan, and then support them as they're moving forward in selling franchises and signing franchise agreements with candidates. So ultimately, the franchise disclosure document, because of the limitations of what you can say and how you can say it, is the sales tool that franchisors need to use to sell franchises. Really all that they have to use to try and sell. So working with franchisors is obviously different than working with franchisees,
right.
but generally speaking, franchisors, particularly emerging franchisors, I think using us have the benefit of our experience of working with franchisees in terms of, what franchisees may object to or be concerned about, and trying to come up with reasonable middle grounds on some of those issues in connection with the preparation of the documents, so that there isn't a lot of back and forth negotiation with the franchisees, particularly the early franchisees, on the terms of the franchise agreement. So we try to bring that balanced approach to the franchisors, and I think it's beneficial.
Yeah, and it seems like it's just so important to get it right from the beginning, from the franchisor side.
It absolutely is, and the first franchisees are critical to the development and growth of the system. And I know that's an obvious thing to say, but it gets sometimes lost on franchisors, because franchisors are very eager to sell franchises and to grow. And it's very important early on to be selective and not just sell to anybody, because if those, like I said earlier, franchisees kind of trip up out of the gate, it's going to be very difficult to find the 6th, 7th, 20th franchisee if the first few don't work out.
Yeah, I mean, the failure rate is obviously important for franchisors. If they have to disclose that?
Well, in item 20, there's tables that talk about openings, closures, terminations, renewals, things of that nature. And so you can glean from the numbers that are in there who's in the system, who's left the system, or I should say how many. But there also are franchisee lists that need to be included in the FDD, and franchisees who've left in the last 12 months have to be disclosed. So you can piece together the information. Again, I think earlier we talked about kind of, what a franchise attorney looks for and can glean from the documents, reading the item 20 table, understanding item 19 and whether it's in there and what's in there versus what's not. Those are the types of things that we have experience with that, a general attorney may not really understand what they're looking at when they're looking at these tables.
Right. And I'm telling you, I've honestly been surprised the amount of times I've come across a franchisee that is just using a typical attorney or a regular attorney to review documents. And from when I've talked to them, their attorney is just pretty much redlined like the entire thing. So tell me about that process when you guys are looking over documents for a franchisee. Is it? From my understanding, a lot of these things aren't really negotiable anyways. So is there a lot of time put into, redlining or negotiating or any of that, or is it something that it's like, look, these are the terms. Do you guys like, as a franchisee, do you like it or do you not? And is it more just about advising them and explaining to them what they're signing up for?
The answer, I think, is yes. It is advising them and going through the documents and educating them so that they understand what a franchise relationship is and what they're getting into with eyes wide open. And while franchise agreements aren't negotiable, there are items that certainly can be negotiated.
Okay.
And so, we do review the FDD, we do review the franchise agreement to see if there's anything in there really that's out of the ordinary or something that, isn't something we would normally see in a franchise agreement. And then, educating the franchisees on, okay, here's a disclosure in item 8 that, you're required to buy everything you need in connection with the operation of your outlet from their authorized vendors and suppliers. You can't go on your own and buy it, and educating them on that so that when they open on day one, what do you mean I need to go through them to buy X, Y, and Z? I can go down the street and get it for cheaper. So, having franchisees understand that before they get in is important. Now, when we review these documents, we do look to see, are there things that aren't customary or not customarily seen in these types of documents, and then we might pursue negotiation of some of those items. Now, generally speaking, the initial franchise fee, the royalty, the marketing contributions, these are things that are not negotiable items. But when you get to territory and when you get to some of the renewal rights or issues, and when you get to some of the reimaging or remodeling or system upgrade type language, there can be potentially caps or limitations on that. Obviously, if you're a franchisee and you're putting $500,000 into your outlet, you don't want them coming back 12 months later and saying, you know what, we're deciding to change everything. You got to spend another $150,000.
Right.
So trying to incorporate some caps. Obviously, every franchise agreement pretty much has full unlimited personal guarantees.
Mm-hmm.
Getting franchisee prospects and owners to understand that going in. There's a lot of more sophisticated investors now getting into franchising.
Right.
They won't sign a personal guarantee for anything.
Right.
I mean, they've, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and now this franchisor who they could buy and sell 100 times over wants them to sign a personal guarantee that out of the gate may be objectionable. So having a negotiation around that, or limiting perhaps the personal guarantee to non-competes or confidentiality trademarks, things like that, may be something that can be achieved. So looking at the documents, understanding who the prospective franchisee is, and then trying to work to find that common ground.
Right.
For many franchisors, that'd be an unbelievable prospect to be a franchisee and be a point of validation with other franchisees. So, they may be willing, the franchisor may be willing to make some accommodations.
Right.
To have that
type of person on board. Absolutely. So the one thing, one topic I wanted to talk about in the franchise agreements is when, obviously a lot of franchisees go into things with an exit plan. Like they're going in business, they want to build it, but they're thinking down the road of an exit strategy. So I guess my question is, what are you seeing that's common as far as a transfer fee across the board? How does that vary between brands? And is there any time brands will be like, well, no, you can't transfer your business?
The transfer fee varies. We'll see very low $2,500, $5,000 to $35,000, $40,000. It just depends.
Mm-hmm.
Transfer fees, are an issue that come up as we do our reviews.
Right.
Typically, that's not something that we negotiate, quite frankly, because a lot can happen between the time when you open to the time that you're ready to transfer it, and it's an issue that can probably be negotiated at the point in time when you're looking to transfer. If
Gotcha.
you're giving the business away and it won't support a transfer fee, and the franchisor wants you out and you want out, maybe there's a waiver of that fee. So, there are certain instances when we've tried to negotiate it at the outset, but for the most part, it's not something that we'll try to negotiate.
Yeah. And I've seen it in one of the recent brands I sold out of. I saw it percentage based, and it's not something It's not something I realized until I went to sell the business, and then I was blown away. Yeah. Because that was the first time I saw a franchisor do it percentage based, and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I thought it was pretty genius on their end, because if you're a franchisor and you have a successful franchisee or operator that's really grown the business, it almost de-incentivizes them to sell it, because if you sell for a big number, now all of a sudden you're paying 3 or 5 or 6% of that gross amount, which to me was very interesting. I never saw that until recently.
And that's one we would try to negotiate to a flat fee, because you should be the beneficiary, the franchisee should be the beneficiary of their success, not the franchisors. But and there really isn't a lot of work that the franchisor is putting in to approve a transfer. So that's one where we would probably try to set it at a flat fee. But are there instances when the franchisor has said no? Absolutely.
For sure.
It happens all the time. There's one brand that has a very broad right of first refusal and exercises on it often, and to the point that they may exercise on it with your buyer and provide the right to buy to another franchisee who wasn't your buyer. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an interesting topic. So explain to our listeners what that is, that right of first refusal, and how often you see a franchisor actually stepping in and doing something with that right.
The right is a broad right of first refusal. Pretty much every franchise agreement has one. And it basically says that the franchisor, if presented with a transaction by a franchisee, can either buy the outlet on the same terms and conditions that the franchisee was selling it to the third party, or take that right and assign it to who they want to be that buyer to step in and buy it from the franchisee in those same terms and conditions. So brands are using it.
But is it more common for them to use it to give to a buyer of their choice? I would think it'd be more common for that than they're not in the business of operating their individual stores, right?
Yes. I mean, most of the time it's used to transfer it to another franchisee,
preferred operator.
Yeah, or geographically, not somebody new. But there's also times when, if the price is too high, believe it or not, or they don't think the buyer that you have is sufficient, they won't exercise and they'll just reject. And they'll say, no, you can't do it. They may like the franchisee so much that they don't want the franchisee to leave the system. And there are broad provisions in the franchise agreement that give franchisors the right. And that's one of the things we try to educate franchisees on when they're getting into the business, that this isn't like any other business. If you own your own sub shop and you want to sell it to somebody, no one's going to tell you yes or no, you can't do that. In a franchise, they can't. So having people understand that. And typically when a rejection might occur, there's not a lot the franchisee can do about it, because even a challenge to that rejection, if you try to challenge that, by the time that is sorted out, your buyer's long gone, probably has another opportunity. So I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday, actually, in a fitness concept, and their prospective buyer may or may not be well received by the franchisor. It's a current existing franchisee of the brand, but they've made a little noise with the franchisor that we're not sure if this franchisee
expand anymore.
They may not. We don't know yet. But I had to explain there's a possibility that, given kind of what's going on here with that franchisee and the brand, we may go to them with this franchisee and they may say, you know what, he or she's causing too much trouble, and we don't want them to have more units. So
what's the franchisees, like, what are their options if they hit that roadblock? What are some of the options that they have?
You can try to pursue a challenge to it. But
I'm assuming that costs a lot of time and money. More realistic options. Is it just to find another buyer?
Bear down and keep operating till you find somebody else. Really,
Okay.
Unfortunately, that's some people get stuck in that.
Yeah.
In that situation, and there hopefully can be reasonable minds on all sides that can talk about it and understand what the issues are and what the concerns are and try to overcome the objections and work through it from a business perspective. Typically, what I would say is, look, you've got somebody that wants out, you got somebody that wants to grow. Let's try to find a way to transition the person that wants out. You don't want someone in your brand that doesn't want to be there and doesn't have the passion
that's
for
like
it.
the position you take directly with the franchisor.
Correct.
For your clients.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting because I've seen it a lot, and it's I've personally seen it where a buyer is turned down or rejected, and to me it's like it's just about doing business with reasonable people. And like you said, if somebody wants out and somebody wants in, what's the best way to make it work, right?
That's right.
So I think what I've learned is when you're a franchisee, you're obviously playing their game, right? And that's something my brother always says, as you know. But it's just very interesting. I think it's just important that franchisees are educated on what they're getting themselves into from day one, and I think that's why it's important for them to work with guys such as yourself and Justin that know what they're doing versus working with just any attorney, because it's not until the end, until they realize, oh, that was a silly mistake that they could have fixed on the front end for a couple $1,000s, right? And I think that's just very, very important that franchisees understand, no matter what brand or business they're getting into, that they know what they're getting into, and that from day one they understand what their options are when they do, or if they do exit down the road, essentially. So
right.
I'm glad you brought that up. So, but I guess let's kind of wrap up here. I guess one last thing. What's one piece of advice, and I don't know if you got to give a legal disclaimer here, but what's one piece of advice you would give to a franchisee that's just getting started, or a franchisor that's launching their brand? And it can be anything.
I think for a franchisee, it would be maybe a little bit broader than one piece of advice, but it's understand what you're getting yourself into, understand the unit economics of the opportunity that you're pursuing, make sure that it fits with, and the opportunity fits with what you're trying to accomplish. Like I said earlier, like buying a job, buying a business, building an empire, that type of thing, and bring sufficient capital to this opportunity. Expect that you're not going to get a paycheck for the next 12, 18, 24 months. Can you sustain what you need to do at home and your other lifestyle, your life expenses without getting a paycheck? So most of these newer opportunities that franchisees pursue fail because of undercapitalization. And, people get involved. They're not cash flowing positive in the first 3-6 months. Well, I only thought it was going to take me X amount of money to get into this. Then they get desperate. They get down on the opportunity. They don't give it sufficient time to build itself up to a point of profitability. So, if you've planned ahead and you've mapped it out with your pro forma and everything else, you may not be desperate in month 3 when you're not bringing enough money home to pay the bills. So, really sufficiently capitalizing. On the franchisor side, again, I think it gets back to, properly validating your concept, making sure that the ROI, the unit economics work before you roll it out to the masses, that you have a really firm grasp of the initial investment and the profitability, that, you can replicate this in other markets. And then selecting the right partners early on that are going to help you get to your goal, and not just selling to anybody that walks in because they're interested, but picking the right partner.
That's the piece of advice right there. All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening to episode 3 of the Franchisees United podcast. Andrew, what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
Probably by email, andrew@marksklein.com. That's Andrew at marksklein.com. You can also visit our website at www.marksklein.com. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and look forward to hopefully participating in future podcasts as Franchisees United grows.
And we're calling out Justin. Justin's got to do the next one.
All right.
And also, guys, if you visit our website, www.franchiseesunited.net, and you click on our legal services, you'll see Marks and Klein there where you can reach out to Andrew and Justin as well. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.